years was the head of the DEA. Ah. Now, when they called me and said, would you like to debate this guy? Would I like to debate the head of the DEA? Would David like to debate Goliath? So, Peter Bensinger, he's, by the way, he's a nice guy. He's a gentleman. I'm sure he's an excellent administrator. And he's a Yale man, but I won't hold that against him. And he's actually very intelligent, a nice guy. One flaw in his thing is that he doesn't know a damn thing about drugs. It's kind of interesting, you know, that the military and the police and these bureaucrats, they live in a germ-free society. They live in shells of bureaucratic, boot kissing. You know, nobody had ever talked to Peter Bensinger, head of the DEA. Yeah, he had 12,000 agents and 172 stations in 79 countries, and no one had ever, kind of challenged the insanity of his program. So when I would debate him, he'd say, hey, Timothy, sorry, but you can't say that. I'd say, why? He'd say, well, that's against the law. I said, well, it's not against the law to say that. I said, it's called a debate, remember? So, but this innocence of the bureaucrat was played to my advantage at the beginning because, he would say things like in front of 1,000 college students on a Friday night, get it? He would say, boys and girls, marijuana is the killer weed. It is an assassin of youth. It wasn't before, but now the marijuana you're smoking is 10 times stronger. And everybody does what?
Other thing to do after that, he only gave her 10 commands, 30 questions, the golden rule is, being a so few of them, you don't fail none of them, and then you're on the bus in Never Neverland, and you'll be here to play like always, and here to stay, and here to play. Oh, it's gonna go forever and ever and ever and ever until then. Until then, it's all up to everybody. I told him the number one thing he should do is help out the hospitals and then help out the musicians, play all the more Earth children, more Earth concerts. And I told Clinton and Gore that on campus, Stephen Stills gave me a high five after I told Clinton and Gore that. And everybody knows he had his son, Jesus Christ, And Jesus and the 10 Greek bloodheads followed him around on tour for hundreds of years. When he was 106, he took them all studying at Mount Fuji, Japan. He took all the apostles there and they studied there. And they got their Cesare fraternity there because they figured they graduated high school then. So they got their, Jerry and Bill Walton and Bill Graham and all the great bloodheads all went out to Egypt and they got themselves a fraternity there.
There's, acid's not for everybody.
I felt as Isadora must have felt. I felt as Isadora must have felt. Floating along in the middle of a rushing ocean. Oh, I felt as Isadora must have felt, floating along in the middle of a rushing ocean.
And it was after I started taking LSD that's when I really became interested in Leary, because him and Metzner and Ramdas being Albert at that time, right? Those guys were people who had really tripped seriously, and they had made notes. It's like they had gone out into this wilderness. They were real frontier types who had gone out into this wilderness and kept it together to make notes and plant certain ideas there, like a riprap. I'm sure that to many people, Leary's main function was maybe as an introducer. He was a guy who was on the evening news all over the place saying LSD to all these people who never heard of LSD, and they go, "Wow, what is this guy? Some strange guy," etc. And a little bit of that function he had on me, but the more important function that he had on me was in steps beyond that, where trying to make sense out of psychedelic experiences vis-a-vis regular experiences and integrate those things. That's where I felt the most value from his work. As at first, the thing of tripping was very profoundly destabilizing, and you felt extremely exposed and vulnerable. And I remember one of the first things that I noticed about tripping was these profound perspective changes. Like I remember an experience of being at the beach and sitting with a group of people, and we're all sitting down, etc. And then I just stood up, just got up from a squat, raised my head maybe 4 feet, and the entire world changed. And it was very, very disorienting.
In high school, back in high school, in the early 80s, the new wave thing was coming out, and the the late 70s punk thing was in there. And not many people were into it in California. It was more back east, but I'm from New York. So, I've been back there lots of times with my cousins. So I'd bring the stuff back, and all the guys, I hung out with, we thought we were pretty hip and cool and everything, and, we were into, like, listening to the Doors and the older 60s rock and roll, and more of the stuff that was drug culture kind of things. Timothy Leary and Ken Kesey and Hunter S. Thompson were like, the writers that were always going, yeah, I got the book by, Hunter Thompson, it's really good. And we'd be trading off our books. And so we thought we were like, like the new hippies. We did a fair amount of acid, but it wasn't like real acid. It was like a weak substitute that, was going around at the time. So we all thought we were like dropping acid, and we were like, into the acid thing, but we really weren't.
This was in the very early 60s. We lived on East 2nd Street in the East Village.
And this is an incident involving Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert.
And
how did this
acid.
come in?
They went to Allen Ginsberg and Orlovsky, and they turned them on. And then they had other friends come in, and they turned them on. And they were checking this hallucinogenic drug while it was legal, and they were still teaching at the time.
How did Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert know where you were?
Well, they just knew where Alan was. They came over to see Alan. At the time, Bob wasn't doing anything in the day except writing his poetry. I was working. I remember sitting in the kitchen after Leary had left one time. Jack Carl Solomon, Peter Orlovsky, Alan, his brother Lafcadio, and Bob and I. And we were talking about a movie based on Jack's life.
Well, I'm just going to tell one story, an anecdote, about the first time I saw Timothy Leary. At the first time I saw him, my sister was a psychology major at Temple University in Philadelphia. This was about 65 or 66, and I was only a freshman in high school. I was only like 14 years old, and she was a freshman in college. And I had smoked pot, but I hadn't taken acid. And we were very curious, and he lectured with Richard Albert, who later became Ram Dass. And their approach was very clinical. It was like they're in pinstripe suits, and it was like this kind of approach. Control group B was given the placebo, while these subjects were given, and that was that. And then the next year, I saw him at Drexel University, also in Philadelphia. And in that interim, I had dropped acid a few times in that summer of '66, I guess it was. And then we saw him, and I guess he had gone through these major changes too, because he came out and he was sitting in a full lotus with white robes, totally long hair, surrounded by flowers and incense, and he came out with those immortal lines, turn on, tune in, drop out. And he was so charismatic, and he made so much sense that he really influenced us.
In almost every trip that I had, there would be a substantial part of my trip that would be absolutely horrific. I was trying to resolve all these conflicts between my high experience and my normal experience. I've been consistently amazed over the past, consistently is the wrong word, but over the past 20 years, on the handful of times that I've met people that I considered to be pretty enlightened people, of, say, our general age group. I mean, not people, say people within 15 years of my age. Anytime I've met somebody who was really a worthwhile character, if I found out that they hadn't done LSD, I've always been really amazed. Because I just felt like, for myself, if I hadn't tripped, I don't know what I would be, some kind of lineless corporate mascot now or something. I have no idea. I mean, I just felt that. I took LSD countless times when I was in the Navy, sitting in restriction barracks with bars on the window and guards going back and forth, and a couple of us are tripping our brains out and just going like, yeah, we're cool. We just have this stellar experiences going on inside our heads, but we maintain a certain kind of external equanimity, so that we don't look like.
One day I was walking down the street with a friend of mine. It was a friend of my cousin's, actually, and he happened to get some ship from New Jersey, I think it was, and he got it in an envelope, and he opened the envelope, and his friend sent it to him. I said, well, let me get some. So he goes, okay, and he ripped some off. It was like blotter acid, and he ripped it off, and he gave me like 3 hits, and I took them, and I figured it's going to be like the same as like every time I've done acid before, which was like nothing, where we like were imagining we were tripping, and so we walked down the street, and he gets on a bus, and he leaves, and so I'm standing there, and before I know it, the cars are going by, and there's these mile-long trails behind them, and I'm like, wow, this is really, something else. And I'm walking along, and there's a friend of mine that lives on the corner from my house, and he was out in his garage. He'd always sit out there, and he goes, Danny, come on in. So I went in there, and he goes, you want to smoke some pot? I go, well, yeah, sure. So he lights up a bong. He loads up a bong load, and he hands it to me, and I hit it. And when I looked up again, it was Satan was sitting in front of me, and there was flames behind him, and I was like completely in terror for my life. And so I run out of he had like spray painting on his garage door, and it looked like it turned into flames, and it was like the flames of hell, and he told me later that I turned sheet white, and he led me out of the garage, but to me it was someone threw me into the flames of hell, and I came out on the street, and everything was twisted and gnarled, and the cars were scrunched up, and the posts were going zigzag, and I thought I said something or did something that screwed up the entire universe, and I was in terror. I was like, what did I screwed everything up. And there was so I'm walking down the street, and I go home to my house, and my grandmother was on the couch, and so I maintain the walking kind of brought me down a little bit, and so I go inside the house, and I go in my bedroom, and I take my clothes off, and I'm in my underwear, and my room is like full of all these rock and roll posters and just everything all over the walls, and so I shut the light off, and I'm lying in bed, and I could hear something in the room, and I could see the lights. So I turn on the light, and when I turn on the light, there were snakes coming out of the walls, out of the floor, out of the ceiling, and they're wiggling, and I mean, they're real. And I just went, oh my God, and I went for the door, and when I grabbed the door, the snakes wrapped around my arm, and when I pulled the door handle back, they broke off and were bleeding from where they were holding me from the wall from opening the door. And so I just freaked out. I run down the hall, and I'm in my underwear. My grandmother's out there, and she goes, what is wrong with you? And I go, well, I'm tripping out. I go, I don't know what it is, but a friend of mine gave me some stuff, and I'm tripping out. And as I'm talking to her, I'm looking at her. She's an old lady, and the snakes start coming into the living room, and they're dropping off the ceiling, and everywhere they're hitting her, it's like acid's hitting her, and her face is melting away. And I just went, oh no! And I thought like she was part of this conspiracy to get me locked in with the snakes, or something. And I run out of the house in my underwear.
I did an interview with R. Crumb back in 1980. I published in my magazine Telly Times. And Crumb gives taking LSD a lot of credit for his creativity. It allowed him to get rid of a lot of the superego that says, don't you dare draw that or write that or say that or think that. Crum in a letter to me once spoke of the need to get away from so much of the head trip stuff that LSD seemed to help some people with, you know. Because you get too much into a head trip, you can become just as unaware as though you're in too much of a, let's say, a body trip or something. There are a lot of things you have to know with your heart, your feelings, your body, your senses, and you get too intellectual at the expense of all your other abilities. You can be very stultified. Maybe you would be a really kind of stultified intellectual who could talk well with his friends, but you'd be like Mr. Jones, who doesn't really know what's going on, like in the Bob Dylan song. Anyway, Crum just explicitly stated that taking LSD gave him the inspiration for a lot of characters he used in his comics. That got him known, that got him considered something of a culture hero or folk hero of the 60s. It really got him launched and made his life much more successful from then on, you know. Since he started drawing psychedelic comics in the late 1960s and getting them published. Now, I don't know, I can't believe this. I mean, I sure don't want to call Crum a liar, but it's hard to believe that, I mean, he just gives this direct credit to this fucking drug, LSD, for enabling him to break free as a creative artist. I kind of hate it if it's really true, but what the hell, he knows about himself a lot more than I do. He's probably right. So I guess I do have one thing favorable to say about LSD.
It just happened that taking acid kind of brought my day of reckoning on each of these various things. Kind of really said, oh, you thought you were going to hold this off for a number of years, but here you go, buddy, you know, like, deal with it. I mean, my trips were bad sometimes in the sense of unpleasant, but you know, I mean, it's parts of life are unpleasant. That's the way of things. So to me, that was my sense, was like, go through it, keep going. I consider Lilly and Leary both to be pretty, you know, very good scientists, because one of their key things is that they're aware of the limitations of the scientific method. You know, they're aware of the limitations of reproducibility of things. It's all technical now. I always had a certain hesitancy about LSD, just because you think LSD is really a drug, you know, and that makes you, it doesn't seem to have the same status as, say, milk, you know, where you just kind of like feel fine about drinking milk every day. I remember there was even a thing in some early book of Leary's where he's talking about, you know, their early experiences with LSD, and he's saying, this isn't a drug, it's a food. It should be bottled like Coca-Cola and sold out of vending machines, and, you know, you go up and put a quarter in and you get a dose and blah, blah.
And so now these interns are out there and they're going, well, come on in the hospital. I go, well, I won't go in if I got to go through that door. If you let me go through that door, then, you know, I'll go in. And they go, well, you can't go through that door because it's for ambulances only, blah, blah, blah. I go, no, because I'm thinking like one door's hell and the other door's heaven. And then, you know, they're going to get me in that door and I'm going to hell and, you know. So finally, they get me in the door and they hit me with a shot of Thorazine or something like that. And I'm out. And so the next morning I wake up in the intensive care in this hospital. And my brother comes in, and he's like, my little brother, and he's like, whoa, you really messed up last night. And so I'm like, God, the only people that are in this hospital are the ones that are dead or think they're dead, you know? And so we had a little laugh and everything, but after that, I could not sleep because the whole trip was at night. And I had a terrible fear of darkness in the night. And for a year after that, I used to crawl in the bed. I was, you know, I'm in high school. I'm crawling in the bed with my little brother at night.
When Dr. Leary and Richard Alpert came, did they bring the acid?
Yes, they did.
Not
nobody
mushrooms.
had it. You know, Hoffman discovered it, but nobody had it. And they were professors, and so, but it was legal at that time. Nobody knew anything about it. So they were spreading the word.
Did Dr. Leary turn you on as well as
No, but
Bob?
I believe that the LSD, the pure LSD 25 that I got was from him. I'm sure it was Sandoz made. And later on, I met a couple of social scientists named Ashby. Thad and Rita Ashby, and they were conducting experiments down in Mexico. and I was living in Mexico at the time, and they were doing what Leary and Alpert had been doing. They were checking out the artists and their hallucinations and so on, and writing about it. And so I was sort of one of their
Oh, right.
one of their people that they turned on.
Yep.
Were you influenced by the turn on, tune in, drop out?
Darwin, not so much.
I'm not sure, but I sure was changed by dropping acid.
How?
I didn't really believe that there were alternative worlds or realities until I saw it for myself. And then it becomes easier to, I think it becomes easier to listen to people with whom you have nothing in common, which is a phenomenal change in a world, anyone's world. Once you can listen to somebody that you don't know anything about, you don't agree with, and you don't understand, but there's a level in you that has to accept that as a part of the world. I just think that alters the landscape.
Well, I always thought that it seemed to me like LSD was too intense a thing to want to just kind of do it every day. You know, I pretty much always had the sense of LSD as being a thing to, something, in a way, something that you wanted to kind of get past. Although I'm still into it. I'm not a tripper. I actually haven't taken LSD in many years, maybe 10 years. But I never made a decision to stop taking LSD, and I still haven't made that decision, and I don't have any sense like I'm never going to do LSD again. I just haven't felt like doing it, or it just hasn't happened for me, you know. But I don't have any sense like I'm through, like I've graduated, like I've exhausted the path of LSD, you know. That's ridiculous to me. I mean, I just have been doing other stuff. And but I always felt like it was not something that you wanted to do.
No, and it was really bad. I missed school. I missed a lot of school, and when the school found out why I missed school, they kicked me out of school. And so that was the end of my high school career. And there were some bad aspects of that whole thing that took me a long time to ever trust myself to take acid again. I mean, after like that one trip, I probably never even touched this stuff for another, 5 or 6 years after that, until my mind was, where I felt more secure. But I mean, at that one time, at that time being alone, taking it alone like that, and really not knowing, thinking I knew what the stuff did, and then I really didn't know what it did, kind of put me at a disadvantage and kind of screwed up my life a little bit for a while. And I got into heavy drinking. That was like the beginning of my heavy drinking.
God was just flying around on his Harley up there in heaven, by himself. He was happy and peaceful and loving. Then he created Jerry Garcia, and he said, Jerry, you're gonna, Jesus, he said, Jesus, you're gonna have these, the 10 Grateful Letters, these 10 apostles, 12 apostles follow you around, and help you out, And they're gonna bring a string instrument for you. You're gonna play, and all the saints are gonna come marching in forever and never, 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 never. He said, love, peace, and joy. Well, we're here. In tribute to their bureaucratic, capitalistic, poisonous destruction. Their evil lives. All the beautiful children on the earth, we're just gonna live right forever and ever and ever anyway. And Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead Band won't make any mistakes with it, so they'll always be with us. Amen. In the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Hail Mary, our Father, oh my God, prayer. All we need really, God said, is prayer and hope and faith. And happy Mother's Day, happy Father's Day, and love you. And see you later real soon, and bless you, and rock and roll forever, and listen to Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead's new songs. They're heavenliest best, and rightest, truest, best, and loudest, and you Even as unbelievable as the truth is, it's that simple and true.
I guess I must have been about 17, and it was up near Mammoth Lakes in a frozen wilderness that we were crashing in order to go off the beaten path and have an experience with this stuff. It was very amazing. My experience was very visual, and I spent a very comical several hours in the middle of the night, in the moonlight, in the snow, trying to paint what I was seeing. I wouldn't judge anyone else's experience. I know for me, it was very good, very good. I respect that it might not have been that for other people. And I have seen people terrified on that drug, but I don't know how to judge that because I wasn't there.
It was 1961 in wintertime, very cold winter in New York, and we were going up to a friend's house on Bleecker Street for Christmas. There was a big Christmas tree. Bob was lying under this Christmas tree, and I was looking at him, and I had just taken a sugar cube, which was given to Bob by Leary. And Bob was on acid too at the time. And when I looked at Bob, I said, I realize now you're Orpheus reincarnated. I said, I wouldn't imagine that except today, that I'm looking into you instead of at you. So that was one realization that I had. I was very sure of at the time that he was Orpheus.
In a sense, I almost kind of became addicted to LSD. Not like I was taking it all the time, but in my first year of tripping, it just seemed to me that my experiences on LSD, my kind of perceptions, my depth of insight into things was so enhanced on LSD that when I wasn't high on acid, I started to feel like I was stuck in a box or in a prison, and kind of my day-to-day experience I started to see it as painful. You know, I started to feel like disgusted at the standard way of life. You know, I felt like a guy who lived in a box. It's kind of like Plato, you know, Plato's image of the people living in the caves, and they see the shadows moving on the wall from the people moving. They can never get out of the cave. And to me, I felt like LSD enabled me to get out of the cave and just see these things. I mean, I always believed in telepathy. You know, I always thought, well, sure, I believe that happens. But it's different when you experience it.
Well, I think it was a great discovery. I really do. I think there's so many people who found themselves under it that they hadn't had any imagination before in a lot of cases. There were a lot of dropouts, I admit it, and but there were a lot of people who were really turned on to creativity.
Then he said about 30 other things to do after that. He only gave her 10 commands, 30 questions, the golden rule is, being a so few of them, you don't fail none of them, And then you're on the bus in Never Land. And you'll be here to play like always, and here to stay, and here to play. Oh, it's gonna go forever and ever and ever and ever until then. Until then, it's all up to everybody. I told him the number one thing he should do is help out the hospitals and then help out the musicians, playing all the more Earth children, more Earth concerts. And I told Clinton and Gore that on campus, Stephen Stills gave me a high five after I told Clinton and Gore that. And everybody knows he had his son, Jesus Christ, And Jesus and the 10 Greek bloodheads followed him around on tour for hundreds of years. When he was 106, he took them all studying at Mount Fuji, Japan. He took all the apostles there and they studied there. And they got their Cesare fraternity there because they figured they graduated high school then. So they got there, Jerry and Bill Walton and Bill Graham and all the great bloodheads. all went out to Egypt and they got themselves a fraternity there.
There's a, you know, acid's not for everybody. Or it's not, I mean, it could be for anybody, but it's not for everybody. And you should do it when you have, at the right times in your life. You shouldn't do it alone, and you should know what you're going to experience, because I had no idea that you know, I've never had a reality change on me before. And that is a really, you got to have a strong mind to handle reality changing on you. Some people will just crack if it, you know, reality changes on them.
I don't think we really know much about it, or the mind.
No.
And I think that it's okay for us to admit we don't know. We haven't really figured it out. I'll tell you, it really is an amazing landscape, though.
Leary says he's thrilled that he's dying.
I have the clip right
And
here from the time.
when I saw
He
that,
meant it too.
it just, at first it was just like a smack in the face. And then after about 1 second, I just went, thank God for this man. You know? I mean, you know, here's a guy who's, you know, a public figure who is wise. You know, he's seen through. You know, and he's lived a long life. He's done so many great things. You know, this and that. And he's going, I'm dying. I'm excited. You know, what do you think is out there? You know, I'm gonna get to find out.
Floating along in the middle of a rushing ocean. Drifting through the smile of a woman, way alone. Oh, I felt as Isadora must have felt, floating along in the middle of a rushing ocean, drifting through the smile of a alone.
have a bumper sticker or a label or a title for our little interaction tonight, we could try this one about the cybernetic society of the 21st century. Or how about the emergence of the cybernetic person during the roaring 20th century? Huh? Yeah. That's you. Actually, the hook for this season's series of involvements is, of course, the Summer of Love. It was 20 years ago this season, 20 years ago today, that the Beatles came out with that album that really swept the world and kind of told everyone that there was something new happening. So there's a lot of kind of interest in, hey, what's happened in the last 20 years, and there's been a lot of reunions, which I'll tell you a little bit about in a minute. And it's nice to kind of check up on what's happening. The question is, of course, why did Summer of Love happen in the year 1967? Well, a good reason for that. Actually, the so-called 60s celebration and movement did start. It became visible in the year 1967. And I think there's a good reason for that. It's demographic and it's arithmetic. See, the baby boom started in 1946. Now you add 21 to 46 and you get 1967. So to me, that Summer of Love was kind of a coming out party, a coming of age party of the first wave, the first year of the baby boom. Of course, it happened, it started, where else? It started right here in San Francisco. It was January 14th, 1967, in Golden Gate Park, when they had the first human being or love-in. Hey, well, what is that? You know, nobody ever heard that concept before. That was a new one. And it was all very informal. Somebody asked me today, who organized it? I said, organized it? I mean, there ain't no such thing. The word went out over the rock stations and word of mouth. It was all around the Bay Area. And without anybody realizing what was happening, I don't know, about 20, 30,000 people suddenly showed up on a January day. That was pretty interesting. And everybody kind of looked around and said, there's a lot of people, a lot of activity, a lot of action going on here. It was perhaps, I think, May, was it, when the same thing happened in New York. They had another bee in there. They had about 50,000. Hey, it started building up. This could become a habit. Then June 1967, that album came out. Now, most of you remember where you were when you lost your virginity or you gained your whatever you call it. You remember where you were when Columbus discovered America in 1492. You remember that. And short-term memory loss. But I think most of us remember where we were the first time you heard that album. You picked that album up, and there were all those funny pictures. And when you start playing that, you realize this was a signal. This was a statement. This was a real basic positioning here, that this was not just another rock and roll record. It was not just love and June and moon. This was a philosophic, a poetic, a social statement that something new was happening. It was a concept album. And above all, there are ideas in it, made you think, and hey, what do they mean, and so forth. You know, how many millions of people spent, how many wasted, spaced out nights trying to decipher and decode the meanings of some of those lyrics. So I would say the 60s really started in 67. Now, if it started in 67, let's see, what happened? Well, okay, 68, within 9 months, this new movement of young people kind of celebrating individuality and indicating they wanted to change, and Dylan was saying, ain't gonna work on Maggie's farm no more. Within 9 months, they had gotten rid of the president, LBJ. He just tucked tail and ran back to Texas, man. And the people went clean for Gene, and Bobby Kennedy came out for the kids, and then 68 was the Chicago Convention, kind of shook everything up. The Democratic Party's never been the same since then. And 69, Woodstock. Can you believe Woodstock? 400,000 people on a weekend coming up to some farm in New York State. That became the third largest city in the state of New York. 400,000 or 500,000 people, almost no sanitation, no real good food, taking God knows what kind of drugs, day and night. And you know, there wasn't one recorded act of violence. Isn't that amazing? can you imagine 400,000 horny teenagers today getting together with, things are kind of, but it was a kind of a lesson. It was kind of a signal that, hey, this is something new. Then 70, 72, 73 Watergate, the 60s really didn't get going until the 70s, and I think the 60s peaked in the year 1976 when we elected as our president the ultimate hippy-dippy howdy-doody Jimmy Carter. He was had a sleeping bag, and he was quoting Bob Dylan, and he played softball with Ralph Nader and talking about lust in his heart. Whoa, yeah. And you know, in the grim Rambo, Pitbull, Ollie North 80s, it seemed kind of pathetic. That guy was talking about love and peace, and he got Sadat and Begin to come over there, and he got him in at Camp David, and he said, come on, war, give peace a chance, and all you need is love, Menachem, and you know, and he didn't let that happen very long. Now, this so-called movement, see, what was happening was, every summer a new wave of kids that became 21 and started joining the party. I think the whole thing ended in this country in the year 1980 when we kind of hit that wall and elected as president. Was it Nancy Reagan? No, it was Admiral Poindexter. That's where the buck stopped. Yeah, so. But, you know, this movement that started here in San Francisco 20 years ago didn't stop. In America, it kept moving on. By 68, it was in France. They called it l'été d'amour. You remember those riots there? They closed the country down. And it hit Spain as soon as the old General Franco died. Young peoples took over, and Hope and Playboy magazine was shown in public, and they legalized marijuana. You know, that idea of the summer of love, which has something to do with we ain't going to work on the assembly line, Maggie's farm for the military anymore. We're going to work out a new way of life, with individuality. It's still going around. Can you believe, for example, the TV we've been seeing on news in South Korea? And that's something, South Korea. You know, it's a standard 1960s scenario. Here are the college students, you know, in white shirts, throwing flowers and rocks, and there's the old Darth Vader, FBI, CIA, DEA, and there's the old classics. Where did they learn it? Well, you know where they learned it. South Korea is a cybernetic television culture. You can't have these young kids watching television and playing rock and roll and listening to CD records from America and from England. Hey, they're not going to let those old kids. So I don't know what they call it in South Korea, but they got a name for it. And the interesting thing, you know, in South Korea, it's not political. It's not left or right, or it's not. It's generational. Also, how about this? In Japan, there's a new generation that's come up 10 years later, born starting around 55. In Japan, these people are called Shinjinrui. And the translation of that, now you're going to think I'm quoting from a Beatles album or from the poetry of Allen Ginsberg, the new breed, or new breed of human being. Now, what's this new breed about? Well, I read about this by the way in Fortune magazine. Hey, get over there. These the young Japanese are not going to scrimp and save. They want to spend money. They want to enjoy life. They don't want to work on Sony's farm no more. They're hedonic. Can you imagine Fortune magazine talking about hedonic? That means they want Haagen-Dazs or whatever. But the real triumph of the summer of love, to me, this season at least, is of all places Russia. You know, there's this concept of perestroika, which means loosening up, and glasnost, which means opening up and restructuring. And I don't know really what happens there, because we don't know really. But as I can decipher what's coming, through in the press and the various European press too, there is an attempt to get rid of the old guard World War II generals, and they're going to reward workers for what they do. They got Stalin and Marx spinning in their grave. There was a big kind of a convention in Russia. They brought in scientists and poets and artists from all over the world, and they had a large delegation from America. But you know who the star of the whole thing was? David Sheff told me about this. never mind, it wasn't necessarily the liberal senators or the distinguished novelists. It was Yoko Ono. And there was a personal meeting between Gorby. I love the New York Post. That's a right-wing, you know. They call him Gorby. Well, Gorby, Mrs. Gorby, met with Yoko Ono and said, "Isn't it too bad that John couldn't be here? And thanks for giving peace a chance." And you know, now listen, Yoko Ono couldn't get within 10 miles of the Poindexter White House, where they have music like the Mormon Tabernacle Choir and Frank Sinatra and so forth. So the point I'm making here is that this movement that started here, which was a generational, which was I think was an inevitable historic movement, has been going on and is still going on. Every time, every place, you see a new generation of young people coming along, stressing freedom, individuality, loosening up the censorship, down military. You know that the thing is happening. I wish we could get back in this country, but I think we will.
I felt as Isidora must have felt. I felt as Isidora must have felt. Floating along in the middle of a rushing ocean. Oh, I felt as Isidore must have felt, floating along in the middle of a rushing ocean. Drifting through the smile of a woman, way alone. I felt as Isidora must have felt, floating along in the middle of a rushing ocean, drifting through the smile of a
Public health situation. You got AIDS, you got nuclear bombs, you got polluted water. I mean, you know, cocaine and marijuana. Oh, yeah, marijuana. Oh, I forgot all about marijuana. You know, I got to confess to you up in front. You know, I'm pretty brain damaged. 27 years aloft. You tend to lose a few billion neurons, but you know, there are three real side effects of taking a lot of psychedelic drugs. One is long-term memory gain. I mean, you're overloaded. You're confused by too much. And the second is short-term memory loss. And the third is I forget. But I haven't forgotten about the deaths from marijuana. Yeah. Okay, the deaths from marijuana. wire the Smithsonian Institute. Let's get the public, get the United Nations, UNESCO. How many deaths from marijuana? Oh, here they come to, oh, here's the record, yeah. Okay, in the 25,000 years recorded history, the people have used, in every climate, have used marijuana as a sacrament, as a religious experience, as a hedonic experience, as a Saturday night flash, as an adjunct to creativity. For 25,000 years, there have been 12 known deaths from marijuana. We got to be scientific here, okay? There's an undisputed case of 2 or possibly 4 people that smoked a little too much marijuana and got the giggles and laughed themselves to death. And then there's a case of 2 or possibly 4 people that they had bad hearts and they had too much marijuana and they got the munchies and they ate themselves to death. Okay, now remember I told you about the roaring 20th century and the cybernetic 21st century? I'd like to tell you a little bit about how I see the roaring 20th century. You see, you got to realize I got an advantage on you here. Yeah. I'm 67 years old, see? That means I've been around for 7 decades. And I tell you, they've been, I mean, any question, we're talking about the 7 most exciting decades in human history. Boom, 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 fast, one wave after another. And I've been trying to surf them, and I've been involved in, so I don't think in decades, people talk about the 60s, say, don't talk, take the long view, centuries, yeah, and there's a certain logic to the 20th century if you've been around it long enough. See, what happened in the 20th century started naturally around 1900. With any Apple computer people here, they can check my mathematics. But around the year 1900, there were 3 cybernetic, psychedelic, far-out philosopher physicists who presented a new version of reality, which happens to be the correct view of reality. You had Newtonian physics where there was this solid General Motors world of force and momentum and energy and work and action and reaction, conservation, all that. Sorry, Newton. I mean, Newton's great, but I think you got to face the fact that Einstein said at first, everything's relative. See? That means that there's no absolute space and time, and that I'm moving at a certain rate in a certain direction. You are too, so that you and I can have very different perspectives, but it all depends on your viewpoint. Oh, that's heavy duty. Because there goes the solid world of the Bible and of all the fundamentalist religions. It's gone if you let Einstein running around loose. And imagine, for example, at the turn of the century, a typical American. You remember that painting by Grant Wood, American Gothic, where you had that guy with a pitchfork, and his wife there. We'll call them Mr. and Mrs. Wood, Farmer Wood. And they can't handle it. What's this Jewish guy talking about everything's relative? We know it, not just. Well, he's making a lot of, anyway, that's it. Then, though, comes Max Planck. He says, hey, the reality from galaxies, stars, out of atoms, and of course, it's all made up, not of solid, this is all temporary clusters of clouds of probability off on, quanta, that means bits at the whole, every time you put yourself, you're going to fall through a screen of quantum information energy that's just bubbling around all the time. And I know that sounds like a bad acid trip, but that happens to be the way the universe is wired at the moment. Now, can Farmer Wood handle that? He's getting a headache. Although it is true that they're bending light waves from stars around Mercury, and they're getting the atomic bomb going, so these guys are, there's no question of it. Pretty soon we realize that they're not screwing around. And then Werner Heisenberg comes along with a real capper. He says, everybody's reality is subjective, that your reality is determined by your sense organs, which are limited, of course, and by the instruments you use to magnify or extend the sense organs, like microscope, telescope, so forth, and by the maps or the models that you use. So you have to face the fact, Mr. and Miss America, you're making your own reality. That can't be handled. Get them back to Germany, right. And the problem was, too, that, you see, these physicists, they couldn't communicate. Why? Because they had to use a real Paleolithic caveman device, chalk on blackboard, so nobody could really understand what these guys were talking about. Okay, here's the situation. we know there's a new reality called quantum reality. It works. There's no question that that's how the universe and that's how atoms and whole, that's how it's put together. But how are we going to persuade, convince for us, ourselves and Farmer Brown and Mrs. Brown, how can we exist in this world which seems so cold and hallucinatory and bizarre and weird and German and Jewish? Well, at those moments of human history where it's time for our species to confront a new reality, whether it's going from 4 foot to 2 foot, or whether it's to make love face to face rather than, whatever. There's a certain breed of human beings in every gene pool that come along at that time and make us feel comfortable. They explain, they personalize, they popularize what's really happening. Now, you know who these people are. They are the artists, the musicians, the playwrights, the poets, the myth-makers, the wizards, the jugglers, the storytellers, the crazed scientists, the mischievous physicists. You know who they are.